1998's Small Soldiers for the Sony PlayStation is not a simple or easy game to discuss, despite its seemingly simple structure and gameplay. It is both a largely generic movie tie-in game and an almost unique meta experience tied to the movie which spawned it, which may just critique the state of tie-in games in 1998. This is Chris from Makopowered, and welcome to Weekend Rental, where we look at games which, while not classics, or sometimes even good, are still worth examining and maybe even playing despite themselves. Even more than most licensed games, Small Soldiers for the PS1 is inextricably linked to the movie whose license it bears. Small Soldiers, the movie, was directed by Joe Dante and released by Universal in 1998. In the movie, Globotech, a multinational corporation specializing in weapons technology, diversifies by buying a toy company. The Globotech CEO, played by Dennis Leary back when he was still relevant, has trouble distinguishing between advertising and reality during a toy presentation by the original employees of the toy company, played by David Cross and Jay Moore. Leary's character demands that the toys shown do what he sees in the animated sample commercial. In other words, toys that recognize and then fight each other. This led to advanced military AI chips being inserted into the toys' two factions, the Commando Elite, the so-called good guys, and the Gorgonites, the requisite opposition. The toys wind up in the hands of a toy store owner's son who activates them, discovering that they do not just play with each other. The Commando Elite are programmed to utterly destroy the Gorgonites, as well as anyone they perceive as aiding them. Chaos ensues. Broadly speaking, Small Soldiers mirrors Dante's earlier, perhaps most famous film, Gremlins. This mirroring is not confined to just the events of the plot. Both movies share a critique of capitalism and the irresponsible handling of potentially dangerous entities. It's not so much there are things man was not meant to know, as it is we, as a society, need to be more careful and responsible. Small Soldiers actually takes it a step further, though, by critiquing the American military-industrial complex, how war and the military are sold as entertainment to both adults and children, the ways that gender roles are imposed on children via toys, see the Commando Elite as boys' toys versus the Gwendy dolls as girls' toys, and, for better or worse, the problems inherent with technological fascination. It should be noted that the basic conceit of the toys recognizing and opposing each other is not as outlandish as it would seem, even in 1998. By 1999, Toy Biz would release Tough Talkin' Wrestlers for WCW, toys that would recognize each other, talk personalized smack to any of the other toys in the line, recognize which limbs were being manipulated, and even recognize when they were being pinned. In 1999. That this was all in service of arguably the most violent era in pro wrestling plays into the critiques on selling violence via toys in Small Soldiers. Remember, steel chair shots to the head were so common in the WCW and WWF that The Rock had to deliver 11 in rapid succession to Mankind in order to get a rise from the audience at the Royal Rumble, causing permanent damage that Mick Foley suffers to this day. This violence and entertainment idea is threaded throughout Small Soldiers, and not just in terms of marketing it to kids. The movie engages in a meta-critique of this notion through its casting. Aside from Tommy Lee Jones, who is fantastic as the Commando Elite's leader, Major Chip Hazard, the movie casts as many of the actors from the 1967 war film The Dirty Dozen as was possible at the time. This includes Ernest Borgnine, Jim Brown, Clint Walker, and George Kennedy, all of whom are voicing members of the villainous Commando Elite, and playing the roles as though reprising the ones they played in The Dirty Dozen. The Commando Elite also speak almost entirely in lines from war movies, highlighting the fact that those movies, and by extension, the toys themselves, are selling war as an entertainment commodity. Weirdly though, the Gorgonites do not carry the same meta commentary, at least so far as I can figure out. Archer, the Gorgonites' leader, is voiced by Frank Langella, which I can actually sort of understand. I mean, viewers of a certain age would be familiar with Langella as Skeletor from the 1987 Masters of the Universe movie, so the violent toy commentary is present with his casting. The other Gorgonites, though, are voiced by the cast of This Is Spinal Tap for some reason? Again, if there's an explanation other than just, we should get Spinal Tap in our movie because it's Spinal Tap, I'm not picking up on it. Whew. Okay. That is a lot of discussing the film, but it needed to be done. Why, you ask? Because in a move that demonstrated either an acute sense of irony, a painful lack of self-awareness, or a weird combination of both, someone decided that the film needed an aggressive marketing campaign, directed at children. Obviously, there were toys. So many toys. But there were also board games, backpacks, lunch kits, coloring books, stickers, school supplies, clothing, and even a cross-promotion with Burger King using their kids' meals and, Rodeo Burger, complete with a commercial parodying 1992's A Few Good Men.
Major hazard. You left the base without authorization, proceeded to Burger King and ordered a rodeo burger?
I've served this command for over...
Answer the question! Did you order the rodeo burger?
You're darn right I did. It was flame broiled and delicious.
Burger King salutes small soldiers with a tasty new rodeo burger. Cheese, onion rings, bullseye barbecue sauce. Right now, part of the 99-cent Great Taste menu.
That rodeo burger, it was pretty tasty, huh?
You can't handle the rodeo burger.
If you ask us, it just tastes better.
This ironic merchandising push was on the same level as the one that happened with the release of WALL-E in 2008. Oh, and of course, what would a violent 90s action movie aggressively marketed at kids be without a video game? The game, developed by DreamWorks Interactive and, in retroactive irony, published by Electronic Arts, is not, however, what one would expect of a video game based on a movie, especially in 1998. The game does not do the expected and try to offer a recreation of the movie. Instead, it becomes a meta-product in itself. It is based on the in-universe lore created for the toy line in the movie. What this means is that the player is not playing as a toy moving through real-world locations. They're playing through the Commando Elite invasion of the Gorgonite homeworld, which served as the backstory for the toys themselves and the battles that they engage in when activated in the real world in the movie. It is merchandise within merchandise, as it were. Because of this, the player is given more insight into the conflict between the two sides as it was initially developed by the toy's creators in the film. The characters. The ones played by Jay Moore and David Cross. This discussion is going to be complicated, isn't it? Anyway, even the manual reads as though it was written for an in-film product, describing how the Gorgonites have been driven back across multiple worlds in the face of the Commando Elite's onslaught. In other words, the in-game factions are behaving like their in-movie counterparts. In the film, the core programming for the Gorgonite toys is to run and hide, while the core programming for the Commando Elite is to aggressively push forward in their assault. This intro in the manual even reads as though it were marketing copy for the toys, with the tagline, "Let the battle begin," to encourage kids to start playing. The voice acting also lends itself to this product in the movie feel. The game proudly proclaims, both on the back cover and in the manual, that Tommy Lee Jones voices Chip Hazard. All of his voice clips are lifted directly from the movie, however. I can find no indication that Jones recorded any original dialogue for the game. Archer, on the other hand, is not voiced by Frank Langella, perhaps because there are too many context-specific lines, since Archer's the player character. Instead, Archer is voiced in-game by Greg Berger. Even if you don't recognize the name, you'll likely recognize the voice. He has a ton of voice acting credits, including Grimlock from the Transformers, and has done voiceover for countless movie trailers from the 90s to the present. This sort of substitution was commonplace in licensed games of the day, especially those based on toy lines, and having the voice of Grimlock, another toy tie-in property, is a nice touch in something like this and adds emphasis to the meta-commentary on marketing these experiences to kids. There's another aspect to the way the game presents itself as an in-movie product. It adds another layer of commentary to the film by foregrounding it in the game. There are hints of a critique of colonialism in the film, in the way the Gorgonites, and Archer specifically, are designed in relation to the Commando Elite. The Elite are clearly modeled after the US military, but the Gorgonites all bear design elements which suggest various indigenous cultures from around the world. The game takes those hints and makes them explicit. The Commando Elite are invading the planet Gorgon in order to, as the manual puts it, loot its resources for its generic overall war effort, and the Gorgonites are in the way. Wait. This isn't a critique of colonialism. This is a critique of colonialism and American imperialism. There is an issue with this critique though, at least in the manual. Throughout the instruction book, Archer is referred to in turns as noble and savage. Taken in combination, that places the way he is characterized in the game firmly into the noble savage stereotype, which isn't great. While you could argue that this is part of the metatext and is an implicit indictment of the in-universe copywriter who penned this characterization, it's still, let's just call it awkward. considering it's the most characterization the video game version of Archer gets. The Gorgonite's indigenous leanings are also implemented in the game in a clever way, at least at first. In the opening levels, the wall carvings and friezes throughout the levels actually act as a passive tutorial, demonstrating how to do things like using the astral fires and spirit wells to navigate the levels. It's nice to be taught how to do things without being forced to do them. The problem with this is that once the player leaves Gorgonite spaces and starts fighting in the Commando Elite territories, these wall carvings disappear, and there is no indication of how certain things which really do need to be laid out for the player work. For example, in the Hall of Patriots level, there's that American imperialism critique, which oddly enough is still timely right now. In order to destroy the secret superweapon being tested there, the player needs to ricochet their rebound shots off the satellite dish into the open port of the laser weapon itself. It's a nice nod to the Star Wars Death Star exhaust port thing, which is not coincidental. The mechs in this game use the sound effects from the AT-ST in the Star Wars movies. But it is not indicated anywhere that this is necessary. Given that hitting the main section of the weapon has the same visual indicator as successfully damaging enemies, I wound up just running around it, pointlessly shooting at it for far too long. It's not a one-off problem either. There are some serious balancing issues throughout the game where some levels are a breeze to get through, and others will stop you literally dead in your tracks. I get that once the player moves on to the Commando Elite levels, they are in enemy territory, so they are at a disadvantage, but just look at this. This is the beginning of a level, and the fire from that turret is hitting me through a wall. This all-over-the-place balancing is compounded by some not insignificant minute-to-minute gameplay issues. Sure, the camera tries to stay over Archer's shoulder, it's just not always successful, and leads to problems even with basic movement. There are more than a few instances where it looks like Archer's weaving drunkenly along a straight path, but that's because the camera keeps swinging to one side or the other, affecting movement and requiring course correction. The camera can also make the platforming more difficult than it should be, as it makes distances hard to judge and can swing around while the player is trying to land a jump, causing Archer to miss and fall to his death instead. As well, while there is a lock-on mechanic in place for basic weapons firing, it's passive and computer-controlled, which can actually be more of a hindrance to the player than an aid. Sometimes the aim lock-on will continue to focus on the wrong part of the screen, throwing aim off entirely, forcing the player to use the manual aim mode. Manual aim routes Archer to the spot in order to be more precise, but that forces the player to take otherwise avoidable damage in the process. The shooting is one part of many basic, generic, and by then tired mechanics present in the game. Archer must move through linear levels, shooting at waves of repeating enemies, including the Commando Elite, something we need to discuss in a moment, while searching for color-coded keys to unlock matching colored doors, unlocking progress to the next level. There are no puzzles to speak of. The so-called secrets, as often as not, just consist of turning to the side while going down a straightforward path.
A secret?
And the shooting and platforming segments are broken up by more shooting segments, just in a mech or stationary turret. The levels themselves also have terrible draw distance and are shrouded in darkness to try to hide just how little is in the environments. Revolutionary and innovative, this game is not. And yet, because this game is designed to be taken as something from the movie itself, rather than just a tie-in to the movie, all of these criticisms can be dismissed, or even embraced. It's not like the developers weren't aware of what they were doing. They were perfectly fine poking fun at themselves using the DreamWorks Interactive logo.
Commandos, let's open up a big can of whoop-ass.
As well, the spaceships that Archer must shoot down at various points in the game just happen to bear a striking resemblance to the box that Buzz Lightyear was packaged in 1995's Toy Story, another movie about toys coming to life. Because of this, the generic game structure, the janky controls, the repeating enemies, all of it can be argued as a metacritique of licensed video games of the era, because all of these aspects are emblematic of such games. Now, I'm not saying that the way all of these aspects were designed was intentional. I'm sure that, given the choice, the developers would have made the controls better if they could. What I am saying, though, is that having these quirks adds to the commentary on the subject, perhaps in spite of themselves. This meta-commentary isn't perfect, or a perfect defense of the game's flaws, however. For one thing, given the way that Globotech went about marketing their toy line in the film, if the game were a true one-to-one piece of in-film merchandise, one would have to assume that the player would be playing from the perspective of the Commando Elite. Sure, Chip Hazard is playable, but that's only via split-screen multiplayer, footage of which I wasn't able to capture because, well, pandemic. Considering the dynamic at play in the in-film marketing, playing as the Gorgonites by default would be unlikely. On top of that, there's the repeating numbers of the Commando Elite, which kind of undermine the idea of the game being an in-film product as well. Each level has only one or two of the Commando Elite featured as enemies, the others being generic robotic sentries or drones. Okay, fine, that makes sense. They're supposed to be elite after all. The problem with that is that not only are the Commando Elite not unique, showing up multiple times throughout their respective stages, but there are even points where gauntlet-style spawn points will endlessly pump out those same Commando Elite until they are destroyed. This seems to play more into the they're just toys perspective on the characters than the this is the lore for the toys approach that the game is taking. The same problem is applicable to the rest of the Gorgonites. The beginning of the first level has the player freeing Insaniac, who accompanies Archer for the first section of the game. This seems to suggest that there's going to be more to the game than just finding keys, perhaps freeing your fellow Gorgonites who have been imprisoned by the Commando Elite maybe? Nope. After that initial foray, all of the other Gorgonites are simply treated as special weapons to be tossed out and left to be destroyed. You don't physically encounter any of the other Gorgonites being held captive. You only find abstract icons that are supposed to represent individual shots of the Gorgonites. What do we want to call them? Fire and forget friends? Disposable duos? Gorgonite and gone? Either way, it kind of undermines the characters as characters, or even toys, when they're treated like this. Finally, we can't talk about Small Soldiers for the PS1 without talking about its soundtrack. In short, it's fantastic. It's fully orchestrated and manages to capture the feel of both the Gorgonites and the Commando Elite. It also manages to do this without just riffing on the themes in the film's soundtrack, written by Jerry Goldsmith, because the game's soundtrack was written by Michael Giacchino. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he has composed the soundtracks for such movies as The Incredibles, the 2009 Star Trek movie, Rogue One, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Spider-Man Far From Home. Giacchino got his start, however, in video games like this one. The score Giacchino created for the game actually follows the path of the game's narrative as well. It moves from the more woodwind and percussion-based instruments that characterize the Gorgonites during the stages where Gorgonite environments predominate, to the more militaristic marches and jingoistic anthems of the Commando Elite. Giacchino's soundtrack elevates the experience above the standard generic gameplay that it otherwise would have offered. In the end, all of these elements come together to make Small Soldiers for the PS1 an intriguing exercise in meta licensing and transmedia storytelling, before either of those concepts had become mainstream. The developers attempt to offer a game from the world of the movie, rather than about the movie, which is an interesting approach, if not a fully successful one. The game's ambitious metatextual design and attempt to critique licensed games of the time doesn't necessarily cover the flaws in its presentation and gameplay. After all, critique that is indistinguishable from the subject being critiqued kinda misses the mark. However, the experience is still unique enough that it makes for a good weekend rental.
Foxley! I'm gonna cut your heart out with a spoon!
Then it begins.